Sony A7S with a Metabones Mark IV adapter, and the Panasonic S1H with the Sigma MC21 adapter. The Canon EF 16-35mm f4 L IS USM is designed to cover a full frame sensor. I've used this Canon wide angle lens for well over a year now, and I purchased it brand new from Amazon.co.uk. The 16-35mm focal length makes this a variable wide angle lens. Marked on the barrel are 5 focal lengths: 16mm, 20mm, 24mm, 28mm and 35mm. In my opinion, this lens is ideally suited for landscape, gimbal work and real estate. I find this lens really useful for making rooms or sets look far bigger than they actually are. Canon claim this lens has a constant f4 aperture, but when I zoom into 35mm, the lens does become darker. My copy of this lens does look to be parfocal, not that this lens has that much of a zoom range. With such an expensive lens, I think that buying a UV protection filter is a no-brainer. The filter diameter is 77mm and the filter threads are made out of plastic. Once you add on a filter protector, this seals the front of the lens from water and dust, and you also now have a front metal filter thread. Being a Canon luxury lens means the 16-35mm is made in Japan and is fully weather sealed with the addition of the 77mm front filter protector. The whole exterior of the lens is made from a high quality plastic. Plastic may sound cheap, but I like the design of these L lenses and they age well. The lens mount and internals are all metal, and I would say Canon makes some of the best quality lenses that I own. The lens has an internal zooming mechanism which I prefer for video, so in theory you could use a matte box on this lens without issues. This is a medium sized lens and only weighs 615 grams. The lens also includes a rather nice lens hood that is flocked on the inside. The lens features an auto manual switch, but you can manually focus the lens at any time. This lens is a true manual focus ring, no shitty focus by wire system here. The focus rotation is around 180 degrees and the lens has a distance information scale. I enjoy manually focusing with this lens, and when focusing the front element does not rotate, so you have no issues using a variable ND filter. Both the zoom and focus rings have a nice large rubber grip. Canon have designed this lens well. I like the fact that the manual focus ring is at the front with the zoom ring at the rear. This lens features image stabilisation which helps with handheld filmmaking. Here is a lens at 16mm with the image stabilisation turned off. And here is a lens with the image stabilisation turned on. Canon rate the image stabilisation on this lens at 4 stops, but it's not the best implementation I've seen from a Canon lens. But I suppose it does help with micro jitters. And now at 35mm, here is a lens with image stabilisation turned off, and here is a lens with image stabilisation turned on. I find the stabilisation to be far more effective at 35mm. The minimum focus distance is 28cm, so you can get close to your subject. Image quality looks to be very good when filming close up with this lens. Focus breathing is not a big issue on this lens. At f4, I'm slowly racking focus from John onto the background and back. You can see the lens breathing a little, but it's not that noticeable in my opinion. I've seen worse focus breathing on other more expensive lenses. Now let's look at image quality. I tested the Canon 16-35mm f4 on my Panasonic S1H, which has a 24 megapixel sensor. At 16mm and f4, the centre of the lens is sharp. Looking at the corners, the lens is good, but the extreme corners are a little soft. The extreme corners get a little sharper at f5.6 and show an improvement at f8 and are perfect at f11. At f16, the image becomes a little softer from the effects of diffraction. It's the same story at 24mm. The centre is always sharp and the extreme corners are a little soft. By gradually stopping down, the corners improve with the peak sharpness being at f11. Once again diffraction starts at f16. At 35mm and f4, the lens is sharp in the centre. Now those corners do look a little softer than before. Stopping down to f5.6 improves the corner sharpness. At f8 the corners sharpen up nicely, but they look the best at f11. So once again the centre is always sharp and the corners look the best at f11, with diffraction reappearing again at f16. This really is a great optic from Canon. I use this lens wide open without issues and I don't always stop down. I've had no issues with chromatic aberrations in my images. This lens really is a stellar performer. Now for distortion and vignetting. At 16mm, the barrel distortion is quite noticeable. It doesn't help that this has been filmed close up, which makes the barrel distortion appear worse than what it is. I don't have any issues with the barrel distortion in my real world images from this lens. At f4 the vignette is quite noticeable, but stopping down to f5.6 makes the vignette more or less disappear. At 35mm the lens shows a minor amount of pincushion distortion. The vignette is more noticeable now at 35mm. Stopping down to f5.6 improves the vignette slightly, but you have to stop down to f8 to remove it completely. Now for flare. Having the Canon super spectral coating means this lens works great against bright lights like the sun. Now for bokeh. At 16mm, the bokeh balls do show some edging and busyness inside the balls. It's the same story at 35mm, only more pronounced. The bokeh balls do show edging and busyness inside the balls. I don't see any onion ringing upon close inspection. Towards the edge of the frame, the balls can have a lemon shape effect. On the whole, I generally find the bokeh from this lens to be nice and soft, not that I often use this lens close up. So to conclude, I think the Canon EF 16-35mm f4 L IS USM is a fantastic lens for video. The build quality, image stabilisation, internal zoom in and true manual focus ring make this a perfect wide angle lens for video use. I use this lens on my gimbal all the time. Sure, f4 is not the fastest aperture, but I've used this lens in low light situations on my Sony a7S without any issues. The f2.8 version of this lens costs double the price of the f4 version and it doesn't have image stabilisation. The choice is yours, but I'm more than happy with the Canon 16-35mm f4L. It really is a stellar performer. Thanks for watching.